Good morning. John Persico here at the Strategic Innovation Channel. And this is a new channel that I've been working on. I've decided to try to kind of bring some ideas together around strategy. I've spent the last probably 35 years studying strategies, such books as The Great Strategists in the World, the classic books on strategy by Little Hart, Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and Kenichi Ohmai's The Mind of a Strategist. So this has been something that I've been interested in for many years now, and I finally decided, looking around and working with organizations as a management consultant, that most of what passes for strategy in organizations is really not about strategy. Most people think they know what strategic planning is, but I'd bet $100 that most of them don't really have a clue. What passes in most organizations for strategic thinking and strategic development is really more tactical planning. Companies may be working on a vision, mission, objectives, goals, measurements, all of the stuff that we think of in classic strategy, and yet basically that's not really strategy. Strategy is the most complex idea that any organization can grasp or even can deal with. And this goes for government organizations, military organizations, and business organizations. For many people, strategy is an art. It's something that can't be dictated in a sense from a formula. For other people, strategy is a formula. It's kind of a set of programming that they can do. They can develop their vision, their mission, their goals, their objectives, and then they think they'll turn out a formula for success. And over the years, I've seen many of these formulas. In fact, most of these kind of formulas, they just fall by the wayside and they get ignored in their organizations. Over the course of the next 52 weeks on this channel, what I'd like to do is I'd like to explore 52 actual different aspects of strategy. There's probably more than that, and there might be less than that, but at least I'm going to try to tackle one a week and see where we go from there. I'm hoping that these will be valuable to everybody watching. Some of these talks will deal with business strategy, and others will deal with strategies that can be applied to your own personal life. I'm a big fan in that anything that can work in your personal life should work in business, and anything that can work in business should work in your personal life. Next week, I'll begin a study from kind of the foundation of what strategy is. But this week, I want to look at a little history of a couple of strategic disasters to just show you why strategy is so important. So I'm going to tell you two stories about strategy and how it's been used or thought of, at least in terms of applying to military problems that the United States has dealt with over the last 30 or 40 years. The first story, we have to go back to 500 BC. I want to remind you all of what the famous Chinese strategist Sun Tzu said. He said, if you do not understand your enemy, you will lose as many battles as you win. He also said, if you understand your enemy, but you don't understand yourself, you will also lose as many battles as you win. The secret, according to Sun Tzu, was you have to understand yourself and you have to understand your enemy. In 1964, actually, the war started somewhat before that, but officially the United States went to war against the North Vietnamese. Numerous reports, advisors to both Kennedy and Johnson, and then subsequently Nixon, spoke out against any possibility of winning this war. They warned that neither bombing nor large troop deployments would work. Robert McNamara, who was the Secretary of Defense under Kennedy and been a former vice president at Ford Motor Company, who considered one of the smartest men in the room, so to speak, was the architect of the Vietnam War strategy. And many years later, when he was 80 years old, he admitted that the war had been pure folly. He had spent decades thinking through the lessons of the war. And the greatest of these, he said, was to know one's enemy and to empathize with him, or as Mr. McNamara explained in Errol Morris's 2003 documentary called The Fog of War, he said, quote, we must try to put ourselves inside their skin and look at us through their eyes. The American failure in Vietnam, he said, was seeing the enemy through the prism of the Cold War as a domino that would topple the nations of Asia if it fell. Perhaps McNamara should have read and understood Sun Tzu. He was clear that he was quoting almost verbatim Sun Tzu more than 2,000 years later. The second story, I also want to go back in history. I want to go back to one of the greatest generals in history, Hannibal Barca, who was a great Carthaginian general who fought against the Roman armies in 218 to 204 before the Common Era. Hannibal won all of the wars, all of the battles, I should say, all of the battles against the Romans, but he lost the war. Ultimately, the Romans defeated Carthage, demolished it, salted all over it, so nothing could ever be planted or grow there again. A total defeat for Carthage. Now, years later, upon engaging in the First Vietnam War, the First Gulf War in 1990, and up through the present time of 2017, the USA has defeated every army and won every battle that we have fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. Nevertheless, we seem no closer to defeating terrorism and our enemies in the Mideast. Just like with Hannibal, we may win all the battles, but we are losing the war. We achieve tactical victory, but strategic victory eludes us. In his book, Obama's Wars, Bob Woodward gave the following quote from James Logan Jones, Jr., a retired United States Marine Corps general and former United States National Security Advisor. Quote from Jones, "If we are not successful here, you'll have a staging base for global terrorism all over the world. People will say the terrorists won, and you'll see expressions of these kinds of things in Africa, South America, you name it. Any developing country is going to say, this is the way we beat the United States, and then we're going to have a bigger problem." End quote. If this sounds like the domino theory, it is. Listen to what Dwight D. Eisenhower said in 1954, referring to Vietnam. Quote, "Finally, you have broader considerations that might follow what you would call the falling domino principle. You have a row of dominoes set up, you knock over the first one, and what will happen to the last one is the certainty that it will go over very quickly. So you can have a beginning of disintegration that would have the most profound influences." End quote. Thus, 2,300 years after Hannibal, we have not learned anything about strategy. Our ignorance of strategy has resulted in grand battlefield victories while we lose the war. We still think that wars are won by pious platitudes and superstitious illogical thinking instead of hard objective reality and knowing our enemies. That's all for this week. I hope you'll check back or subscribe to this channel so you can receive updates when I post new material. I am planning to post material at least once a week on strategy, and as I mentioned, next week I'll deal with what strategy is and to some extent what it isn't. Thank you very much. Have a good day.